For this section of notes, we are going to review completing the square. And you can solve quadratic equations by completing the square when any quadratic equation cannot be factored. You can solve it using the quadratic formula, but you can also solve it by completing the square. Okay, 25 is a perfect square. Because it has two factors that are the same, 5 times 5. X squared plus 6x is a perfect square trinomial because it has two factors that are the same, x plus 3 times x plus 3. When you FOIL that out, you get x squared plus 6x plus 9. So in this next section, we're going to practice creating perfect square trinomials. Okay, well, what does C have to be to make this a perfect square trinomial? Well, C has to equal 25. Okay, because if you notice in here, 3 times 3 gives us 9. 3 plus 3 gives us 6. We have to kind of think, well, what number can be added, the same number be added to give us 10? And the same number being multiplied to give us a perfect square. Well, that's 5, because if we take 10 and divide it by 2, we get 5. 5 plus 5 gives us 10. Then to get that back number, we multiply. 5 times 5 gives us 25. Okay? So we kind of do the same pattern here. To get the number, just cut 8 in half. We get 4. And 4 times 4 gives us 16. So C would equal 16. Follow that same pattern. This one's tricky. 3 divided by 2. Well, we're going to leave that as a fraction. 3 over 2 times 3 over 2. 3 times 3 is 9. 2 times 2 is 4. So C would have to equal 9 over 4. And same kind of concept with D. So, well, negative 7 divided by 2. Can't simplify it. Negative 7 times negative 7 is 49. 2 times 2 is 4. So C would have to be 49 over 4 to be a perfect square trinomial. There's a rule that we can come up with. If you noticed, for each one we took that middle number, which we say is B. So remember A, B, C. We took B, divided by 2, and then we multiplied it by itself. Well, when you multiply something by itself, you're squaring it, because 5 squared is 25, 4 squared is 16, 3 half squared is 9 over 4. So we come up with, you divide, write a little neater. You divide middle number, which is B, by 2, and then square it. That's the rule for creating a perfect square trinomial. Okay? When you're completing the square, you have to take the quadratic that they gave you and transform it into a perfect square trinomial. So your first step is you want to rewrite the equation. You want to get all the terms with the variable on one side and the constant or the number all by itself. Why does that do that? Constant on the other. Get all the terms of the equation, divide all the terms of the equation by the coefficient in front of x squared, if it's not 1. If there's no number in front of the x squared, you don't need to worry about that step. Then we're going to follow that pattern. You take the middle number, divide it by 2, and square it. And you're going to add that result to each side. Then we're going to factor the trinomial, find the square roots, and then solve for x. And we'll see an example here in a second. Okay, our first example that is on your paper is x squared minus 14x plus 24 equals 0. So again, get the variables on one side and the constant on the other. So I'm going to subtract 24 on both sides. And I'm going to replace 24 with a blank. It's equal to negative 24 plus a blank. Okay? That's reminding me that I have to fill in those blanks with b divided by 2 squared. So our next step, you take the middle number. So we're going to take negative 14 and make sure you remember that number, the sign. If it's negative, bring the negative. If it's positive, keep it positive. So divide it by 2 and then square it. Okay? Don't actually square it though. Okay? Just divide it by 2. Negative 14 divided by 2 is negative 7. Keep it squared. And that's what we're filling our blanks in with. Okay? Then clean it up. Okay? We're going to factor this side. So make 2 parentheses, and the factoring is really easy because we have 2 x's, so we separate and each one gets an x, and we do the same with the 7. We have 2 negative 7, so each one gets a negative 7. Then you can just plug that into your calculator. And when you do so, you end up getting 25. Okay? So again, we're going to keep cleaning, neatening this up. When we have 2 parentheses that are the same, we can write it once, square it. So now we're just solving. So we're going to square root both sides. We get x minus 7. Square root of 25 is plus or minus 5. Don't forget that plus or minus sign. Okay. Move the 7 over. And then jump the 7 in front of that plus or minus 5. We can clean this up. 7 plus 5. 7 minus 5. So we get 12 and 2. Because remember, when you take the square root of 20 of any number, it's positive, that answer, or negative. So that's why we put the plus or minus sign. And then whatever number, do the opposite to move it over. Jump it up in front of that plus or minus. If this ends up being a perfect square, separate it. If you can't simplify the radical, then you just leave it. And there you go. Okay. Take a look at number 2. Look at 2, we have x squared minus 10x plus 3 equals 0. Again, take the number, the constant, move it over. Remember to write in your blanks. Okay. Then our next step, divide the middle number, so negative 10, and make sure you bring the negative and square it. But don't actually square it. Just divide it by 2 and leave the square. That's what we're filling our blanks in with. Factor this side. So write your 2 parentheses. We have 2 x's, so each parenthesis gets an x. We have 2 negative 5s, so each parenthesis gets a negative 5. Clean this up even more. And we end up getting 22. Condense it, we get x minus 5 squared. And then we just solve. Square root both sides. we get x minus 5 because we took the square root. 22 is not a perfect square, so we say plus or minus 22. We can't simplify 22 because the only two numbers that multiply to give us 22 besides 1 in itself is 11 and 20 and 2. Those are prime numbers, so we can't break it down. So then we're just going to move the 5 over. The 5 jumps in front of that plus or minus sign. Done. Okay, I'll add one more. Okay. And then our third and last example, number 3. We have x squared plus 3x minus 40 equals 0. Then move the 40 over, move that back number over to the other side. We get x squared plus 3x. Don't forget to write your blanks. Equals 40 plus blank. Then take that middle number, so 3 divided by 2 and square it. Don't actually square it, can't divide it by 2 either, so we leave it as 3 over 2 squared. That's what we are filling our blanks in with. Okay. I know there's a fraction, but it's the same exact process. Factor that side. We have 2 x's, so each parenthesis gets an x. We have 2 3 over 2's, so each parenthesis gets a 3 over 2. Equal to, clean this side up. Again, just plug it in your calculator. Just do 40 plus parenthesis 3 divided by 2 squared. And then make sure you leave it as a fraction. So it equals 169 over 4 when you clean it up and change it to a fraction. Condense it, so we get x plus 3 over 2 squared, 169 over 4. Square root both sides, so we get x plus 3 over 2 is equal to, square root of 169 is 13, square root of 4 is 2. Move the 3 over 2 over, so x equals, when you combine it, again leave it as a fraction, you get 10 over 2, which is just 5. And we forgot our plus or minus sign, don't forget that. So actually, when we move it over, because it was a perfect square, we get x is equal to, that negative 3 over 2 jumps in front of the plus or minus, 13 over 2. So we just separate it and going above because I ran out of room. Negative 3 over 2 plus 13 over 2 and negative 3 over 2 minus 13 over 2 equals 5, and this equals negative 8. And there are your solutions. Okay, so again, you just move the back number over, divide the middle term by 2, square it, but don't actually square it, and then factor and clean up both sides. What we're going to end up doing with this with circles in the next lesson, you just have to know kind of the first few steps, and the other steps will kind of take care of themselves. Okay? And there you go.